Welcome everyone to the inaugural seminar of the Natural Capital Seminar Series. It's organized under the JNCC Lunchtime Science Talks. Today's seminar is entitled Engaging Businesses with Biodiversity Through Natural Capital. Natural capital, as many of you know, is a core theme in JNCC's corporate strategy. The purpose of this series is to showcase some of JNCC's work and to learn what others are doing in the same vein. For those of you who do not know me, especially on the online group, my name is Deanna Donovan, and I'm the environmental economist at JNCC. I'm also the organizer of this series. I will be the moderator today, assisted with essential technology by very capable Becky, Melissa, and Lucy. For those of you joining us online or in Aberdeen, if you are experiencing technical difficulties, please send us a message via the software. Today we have 3 speakers, each of whom will give a 10 to 15 minute presentation. Participants online may submit questions at any time, but we will refrain from answering questions until the end of the presentations. A recording of the seminar will be made automatically. Afterwards, if anyone has unanswered questions, or if you would like a copy of this recording, they should contact Lucy, Matt, or myself. Now, let me briefly introduce the speakers. First up will be Matt Smith, my colleague in the Biodiversity Ecosystem Services and Natural Capital team. He manages several projects with businesses in that area. He will present a summary of JNCC's work in the area to date and briefly introduce the new project. Tom Smith. Tom, could you stand up? Tom is a PhD candidate at the University of Leeds, currently on secondment to JNCC. He's investigating biodiversity as an issue of corporate social responsibility. He will present an overview of a new project, a collaboration between JNCC and the University of Oxford, funded by the Valuing Nature program. Finally, we will be pleased to welcome Dr. Prue Addison. Prue is a NERC Knowledge Exchange Fellow in the Interdisciplinary Center for Conservation Science based at the University of Oxford. She works closely with multinational businesses, government agencies, and NGOs, bringing the lessons of conservation science to the private sector to help mainstream biodiversity in corporate planning and business operations. Prue's work focuses on corporate biodiversity accounting, or accountability that is, helping businesses develop systems to measure, evaluate, and report on corporate performance vis-a-vis biodiversity. Now let me hand over to Matt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deanna. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and everyone on the webinar as well. So I'm just going to give you a quick run through of really how JNCC have got to where we are today. Then a little bit about our future aspirations of where we can take business and biodiversity from a corporate standpoint of JNCC. Then I'll hand over to Tom, who will give you a rundown of the Valuing Nature placement that we're hosting in collaboration with University of Oxford. And then Prue will give a rundown of her NERC Knowledge Exchange Fellowship. So a little bit about what we've done historically here at JNCC. So the first piece of work we actually did was back in 2009. This was kind of led by the UK Overseas Territories team, along with our European unit. It looked very much at foreign direct investments and the impacts that had on biodiversity in countries that are actually receiving that flows of finance. So it's kind of early looks at kind of investment footprinting and how it affects biodiversity. And the idea was to kind of just develop that strategic overview of what those impacts were, and it used the 5 MEA drivers. So when we say MEA, the multilateral environment agreements, and relating it back to that. So how is investment either impacting positively or negatively onto that? I'm not going to go into any of these in great detail, but it's really just to highlight what's out there from JNCC, and there's also links on each of the slides which you can follow if you would like any further information. Moving very, very swiftly on, there was a kind of a bit of a brief hiatus, and in 2014, post UK National Ecosystem Assessment, JNCC chaired the Living with Environmental Change Ecosystem Task Force. under the Ecosystem Task Force, there was a roadmap for realising nature's value. So the aim of the roadmap, as it says on the screen, was to really enable different users to kind of understand what the knowledge was out there, everything from tools and data that was created by the LWEC partners. And those partners were the various environmental agencies, so that's the conservation bodies, Environment Agency, and so on and so forth. And the idea was to really present that type of knowledge and information that would enable different users to make decisions around natural resource management. One of the key deliverables that came out of that was the monitoring the MAP, so the monitoring action plan for biodiversity, natural capital and ecosystem services. This looked at how the various monitoring programs are used by different user groups, one of which was the private sector. So what we did is really looked at how the various monitoring initiatives were used by these user groups, the different gaps in the knowledge, and also how they could be potentially improved to include biodiversity, physical, economic and social data, and really to kind of understand how that data could be better presented, better catalogued to make it more accessible to the different user groups, which historically the environmental monitoring schemes weren't always set up to address. Off the back of that, we worked closely with the Ecosystem Knowledge Network. So one of the outcomes of the action plan was found that there was a whole raft of tools and suite of knowledge and data out there, which was causing a lot of noise within the space. And the different user groups were finding it very understand what was available, what can be used, how it can be used. So really the whole idea of this was to actually work with the EKN to assess what the right tools were for the different jobs that the various user groups wanted them for. So the initial funding came from JNCC. There's been an update on that, which was funded by NERC, and that is hosted by the Ecosystem Knowledge Network. The reason why it's on the EKN is really it's about practitioners, getting practitioners to talk to the tool developers and really to share case studies about how these tools are being used. So within this space, we can expedite uptake and really understand where those barriers to uptake or how these tools can be improved, and also notably for business use as well. So a bit more of what we've done recently. After the LWEC Ecosystem Task Force, JNCC realised that we need to start understanding, okay, so realising nature's value. I suppose as a conservation organisation, we generally can understand what the values of nature, natural capital, ecosystem services bring to society, to business. But what we understand is what the business motivations were to actually engage with nature. And one of the key findings was a lot of the space that businesses were occupying was around eco-efficiency measures. So it's very much about energy and water saving. And actually, you know, we're a biodiversity organisation. We focus very much on biodiversity. Was missing in the picture. So there was no kind of real adoption of systematic, holistic approaches. And what we really wanted to try and find out was what was the business case for action, and identify where the early wins were for us to kind of understand how we can really bring natural sciences into the whole arena. So again, that report's available. And one of the other outcomes of that was to really understand how natural capital feeds into the integrated thinking that a lot of businesses adopt. So we did some work with FTech, and I know we have representatives of FTech on the phone, was to really understanding with this integrated thinking. So how does this fit into your human capital? How does it fit into your intellectual capital? How does it fit into the human capital? I suppose of all the capitals, it was natural capital that businesses were struggling with to disaggregate and understand how it fitted into their business models. So really from this, what we found was that there are different levels of maturity. So I'm really kind of going from where some businesses were truly trying to understand where they're having impacts on the environment, and now moving into kind of more where the dependencies. So if you were to degrade or draw down on natural capital, what would that mean in terms of the long-term risks that would pose to your business, but other businesses operating in particular spaces in terms of the long-term value creation that your business would rely upon natural capital to create. Then looking at how is natural capital actually material, so how does it matter to your business and other businesses around you, and then actually kind of understanding the depth or the embedding of that process within the corporate thinking across. And a lot of the reporting is very much about external communications, and that has various benefits for businesses. So, you know, there's corporate social responsibility, like good PR, but it's also about kind of understanding where those risks are around natural capital and how that can be incorporated into actually leveraging more funding, for example, from different financial instruments. Talking of finance, we've also been doing some work on sustainable financing and kind of max impact. So we worked with some Dutch colleagues who have been working on sustainable finance mechanisms within small island states in the Caribbean. So we've built on this work, we've built on the framework which we can see here. And again, you can see it in greater detail on the reports on our website. But basically what we're trying to understand is, how does a sustainable finance mechanism, i.e. how do you invest in natural capital at a discrete scale, and it actually brings back a return on investment. So you're actually protecting your business interests, you're protecting the environment, and there is a return on investment. And we focused on kind of small island states because in a sense they're kind of a nice microcosm to start testing out the interrelatedness of the natural capital approach. So you're thinking about, you know, who are the ecosystem managers, who are the businesses that need to be brought in, but really, you know, what are the knowledge needs, where is the knowledge, and how does it fit in holistically within a kind of a bounded natural system, if you wish. So what we've got coming up, and this is obviously leading into what we're doing now with Prue and Tom and the Value in Nature program, amongst other initiatives we've engaged with. So this is where we've worked with Arcadis, with Martina Gavan and others. So really looking at trying to understand, okay, so we understand about reporting, we understand a little bit about materiality, but how does biodiversity fit into this? How does biodiversity actually become a material issue within business thinking? So what we've tried to look at, and it's been a bit of a tough process because the evidence base is not massive at the moment. We're hoping to improve that. Is to understand, right, how does biodiversity loss translate into loss of ecosystem functioning processes which deliver the flow of services, goods, and the benefits that not only society but business as a part of society rely upon. So what we're trying to really understand is, you know, where are the opportunities for better integration of biodiversity information to start to disaggregate what are these dependencies, how does it translate into risk, and importantly, what are the opportunities for the science community, the business community, and other interested parties to take these interdisciplinary approaches, of which understanding biodiversity is part of it, to really start to communicate the value of considering biodiversity across a whole range of sectors. One of the projects we are actually involved in, and it's not just a JNCC led. This is a multidisciplinary collaboration funded by the UK Space Agency, and it's really looking at how UK space technology, UK scientific excellence can feed into supply chain resilience. And when we talk about supply chain resilience, we're looking at it from the natural environment that these crops, these cultivars actually rely upon. So everything from the water, the soil, and the climate change, and any other global environmental shocks that may be coming along. And how this actually improves their business resilience. So we're focusing really on sustainable agricultural management, leading into sustainable livelihoods in Peru and Colombia, and understanding how space technology can actually feed into informing a ecosystems approach to integrated land management. So JNCC are leading the work package on sustainable livelihoods, and we're also inputting into the standards and advice that goes into how Earth observation data is processed. But fundamentally, what we're using is Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2 data, free data that's coming down from the satellites, and our partners are developing front ends or GUIs, which are processing this data that enables land managers at various scales to understand the impacts and dependencies they have on natural capital. Another piece of work we've been working on is offshore industries. So this is focused on decommissioning options. The overarching idea is we've developed a decision support document which signposts the various data that is available to industry, which JNCC and others hold, that helps them understand their potential impacts on features of interest through decommissioning options. And the innovative part of this is understanding, okay, so if you impact a feature, and in this sense it's sandbanks, What does that mean in terms of the impact on ecosystem services? University of Hull are the lead partners on this. We've obviously worked with Shell and Bays. This is actually due for production. Well, the project comes to the end of this month, so it'll be out and published within the next month or so, hopefully. Another part of the work we're doing is really engaging with the research community, and Prue's going to go into this in a bit more detail, but we've started working with the Ecosystem Service Partnership to explore how is it that we engage with the International Ecosystem Service Natural Capital Research community to actually bring them to the table with business, with policy, with wider civil society to understand how the whole wealth of international knowledge on natural capital and ecosystem services can better improve or actually inject into the business needs, particularly the user needs, the need for tools, to actually, I suppose, in a sense, bring this knowledge to support evidence-based decision making within the private sector. So again, watch this space. And a really nice example of where we're doing this practically is we are working collaboratively with a range of partners through Biodiversity, the International Federation for Landscape Architects, and JNCC, Natural Resources Wales, to start bringing together what is the research, the knowledge base on blue-green infrastructure projects, and how is this then translated into languages such as that engineers, for example, the people that are implementing these systems on the ground, and really namely it's like, how do we deliver biodiversity benefits? How do we make sure that we understand how these natural systems are going to evolve, are going to respond to different stresses, climate change? And really, I think from the business perspective, they're really interested to know how does it feed into the whole life cycle of the project, and particularly how does it reduce maintenance costs, and also how does it reduce risk, so flooding, natural flooding management, and feed into kind of what we call nature-based solutions. And I've touched on it as well, but this is another area that we're looking at is sustainable financing and understanding how we can bring the knowledge base, the natural science knowledge base, into impact investing, novel financial products, which moving forward, I suppose novel financing is part of the delivery strategy for the various international targets and goals, which is a great segue into Tom's work. So here's our contact, my contact details. Please do stay in touch, and obviously happy to answer any questions at the end of this.
Cool. Brilliant. Well, yeah, thank you very much, Matt. So as Matt was saying, this is a program that's a project that's linking together JNCC, University of Oxford, and me. And it's being funded by the Valuing Nature group. So Valuing Nature placements are designed to actually kind of give people access to different experiences away from what they normally do. And in my case, that's actually learning about policy. My work has been with looking at how businesses think about biodiversity. It links up quite nicely. And I'm just going to give a quick overview of what the project's about, the rationale that underpins it, what we're actually doing, and where we're hoping to go with it. So very briefly, so why do we think this work is necessary? What's so important about biodiversity and the link with business? Well, right now, businesses don't really seem to see biodiversity as particularly relevant. This is just an illustration. This is from a Global Compact report recently, and life on land, life below water, both linked both very low on the list of priorities, and so many businesses don't really seem to see biodiversity as particularly relevant, and that they seem few are tackling the impacts or really considering dependencies. So it's trying to understand why is that, what are some of the problems, and we think part of that is because we aren't really speaking the right language, and part of it is that we don't really understand how to make current goals and targets relevant to them, so they don't really see how they link up, how they can contribute. A route in, we think, is to actually use the current business engagement, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals have been, fairly well publicised, and there's certainly something that businesses are responding to. There's already been a suite of reports. This one from PwC actually explains to business how they can engage with the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's getting quite a lot of traction. Well, that could be a route into actually understanding how we can map biodiversity into that. And there is already some work that's gone on to say, okay, this is how biodiversity targets at international level link in with the SDGs. We decided to take that a step further forwards and actually try and pull together a full map. Now, this is a bit of a multicoloured blob at the moment, but the point is to try and demonstrate that there is quite a lot of crossover between the international sustainability goals that you see down there, down at the far left-hand side there, and then the various SDGs. And you can see that there's greater relevance with some of the SDGs than there is with the others. So there are areas that we can definitely target. That's a sort of a starting point. Where we want to move on to is actually showing, okay, so we're going to concentrate on 4 international conventions, which is the CBD, CITES, Ramsar, and CMS, and point out how contributing to doing various business activities will actually contribute to achieving the different targets and different goals set for these conventions. What we have at the moment is a sort of a vague set of actions that businesses can do that will contribute to them. What we need to do is provide some further guidance on exactly what that action looks like, how it would map into those goals. It's easy to give some vague kind of examples right now, but nothing that's really going to be particularly helpful to actually guide a business as to where they can concentrate their efforts and what those efforts would actually mean in terms of contributing to goals and the SDGs. So this is very much a work in progress. This is not a final piece of work by any means. One of the key things we want to do is produce a series of illustrative case studies. I mean, you might say, well, there are many case studies out there. There are, but actually at the moment, what a lot of those case studies are is very vague about exactly what the business is doing, how it is contributing to wider biodiversity goals and the SDGs, and it's also very unclear about how they get there or got there. So what we want to do with these case studies is take stuff that's already out there and point out, okay, so these are some of the specific actions that they're actually doing at the moment. These are how these specific business actions are actually contributing to these different goals. So the SDGs, the biodiversity strategic goals, so in this case, I'm suggesting they're contributing to B and C, and then the actual scale of effort that's involved. So, okay, so how much does a business need to invest, put in, to what kind of level of activity is going to be involved to actually get to this point? Is it just a case of producing a few nice slides and presenting them, or is it actually going out there and forming partnerships and investing in a protected area or something along those lines? And then finally, to actually give some of the background to the project itself, so that other businesses, when they're looking at these cases, say, okay, so these are the steps that are involved, this is the rationale behind the project, and this is where it's actually got to. So it gives some actual proper, clear guidance on how to get there. Matt mentioned some work from FTech earlier about FTech and JNCC about a scale of, is it Arcadis? ACOM, sorry, ACOM. So it was a scale of action. So running through from a very basic level, which is understanding what your dependencies, what your impacts are on biodiversity, through to actually incorporating and fully integrating your work. So how would that actually look? Well, you start off with saying, okay, so some of these actions are just about raising internal awareness. That's the very first step. Then actually understanding, okay, so we need to expand our assessment and do more in the way of assessing. But it isn't just about data. We then need to look at, okay, so what's an actual implementation action? It could be something like establishing a protected area. And then finally, embedding in a business. So embedding is actually at the point where you really formalize what you're doing. It's not just a case of ad hoc one-off actions. It's about actually saying, okay, we're going to integrate this into our strategy and make it part of what the business does. It's not just a case of doing something on a one-off basis and then sticking it on a website and saying that's great, we're done. And then the final step is actually fully integrated reporting. So it's being fully transparent about the whole process. Now, that's quite a long way ahead of probably what a lot of businesses are doing right now, but we're going to see from what we get back. So yeah, what are going to be the outputs from this project? It's only a 4-month project, so it's really just a very much a starting point. And as you'll see from what Prue's about to present, it's something that builds into something much bigger, really. And already from what Matt's shown. So the case studies are just one element, and that's very much to give a clear guidance to businesses about what they can do to contribute to the goals, and also perhaps to identify some of the gaps that there are at the moment. We may not find all the things that we want to see. We may not see that there's many cases that are contributing to some of the goals, and there's more that's being done in other areas, and that will be a lesson in itself. A related point to that is that we're going to produce some sort of a technical note that will give that will guide through readers as to exactly what our methodology was, and maybe some of the areas where further work can be done. And this is possibly more of an ambition than anything else, but maybe to see if there are any policy gaps. Maybe there are areas in existing international policies that, or even national policies that need to be addressed to actually help engage businesses further than they already are. But I think the key point is to say that the project is about kind of getting businesses to realise it's an awful lot they can do right now without any need for additional regulation or guidance or guidelines or anything else. There's lots of great tools out there. There is a lot of good guidance. It's a case of actually bringing it together and giving it some sort of a semblance of breaking it down a little bit and making it more relatable to what they do. And on that point, we really are looking for lots of good examples of case studies. We've put a call out. Some of you may have seen it at the JNCC. Some of you on the webinar may have already received it as well. But yeah, we've had some good stuff back. But anything that you think may look worthwhile, please do send it to us. We're going to start vetting it, and your cases may well end up in the final thing. And if you want to know more, well, you can talk to me. You can talk to Prue, you can talk to Matt, and any of us can give you a bit more detail. And that's me done.
Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Prue. I am a NERC Knowledge Exchange Fellow at the University of Oxford, and I'm a conservation scientist. So I work with businesses on biodiversity issues, but my unique selling point is to bring lessons from conservation science and practice to the private sector who are thinking about biodiversity. Okay, so just quickly, the title that I've been given is Knowledge Exchange Fellow, and I just wanted to explain what knowledge exchange is. It's a term that's flying around a lot at the moment, and basically, as this diagram illustrates, knowledge exchange is somewhere between research and practice. So the whole idea is that we translate research that's being done in academic institutions and scientific institutions to help translate that and apply that to the real world, take it outside of universities and help demonstrate how science can really help transform how businesses and government agencies and society operates. So the fellowship context, just a little bit of background. As you've already heard from Matt and Tom, businesses are starting to think about biodiversity. But many businesses are kind of in this early stage of grappling with, what is it? How does it interact with our business? How would we go about actually incorporating biodiversity and natural capital considerations really into business decision making? And businesses are facing a lot of challenges around how they would measure, evaluate and act on any sort of biodiversity information or performance assessments that they may do from a site level all the way up to a corporate level for multinational corporations. How do they get their head around this? There's a lot of, it's quite a complicated area, but basically this is what conservation science has been working on. We've been working on for the last few decades. We're all about, helping government agencies think about biodiversity, how you measure and evaluate that. So basically, I'm trying to bring conservation science lessons to help with this issue of corporate biodiversity accountability, how businesses would measure, evaluate and report on biodiversity. So as I said, conservation science, it's a discipline that's been around for the last few decades, and it's, it came about because of this continued loss of biodiversity, and it's a really practical discipline. It's all about how can we understand biodiversity and what's going on from local to global scales with biodiversity patterns. And how can we use that to inform conservation practice? The foundation is the establishment of protected areas around the world, but it goes far beyond that around how do we actually manage the natural environment to try and halt biodiversity loss. So there are a lot of tools and approaches that have been developed through conservation science. And as many government agencies would know, conservation scientists have worked for a long time with government agencies around the protection of biodiversity through protected areas. But now there's a full spectrum of activities in conservation, from protect all the way through to trading nature. And there are a whole lot of tools and approaches that exist under this full spectrum of conservation activities that I think could help businesses understand and measure and act on biodiversity. And they range from approaches in the far left around protected area management effectiveness evaluation, a framework established to help guide and assess ongoing management of protected areas, through to the conservation of biodiversity. Structured decision making is a process, along with a whole suite of modelling tools that help managers implement, monitor and adaptively manage their conservation actions. All the way through to trading nature. The mitigation hierarchy is now one of the many tools in the conservation science toolbox to help guide avoidance, minimisation, restoration and offsetting for biodiversity. So how do I think, there's this massive toolbox of approaches and models that could help businesses, but the main thing is to really translate how I think that they can help businesses. And right now, here are just some critical sort of areas that I believe we can really use conservation science tools and approaches to help businesses. The first one is, and this relates directly to Tom's work as well, how can we help businesses set corporate biodiversity goals? The first step in this is actually illustrating all the international biodiversity targets and what the global community see as a vision for biodiversity conservation. The next step is how can we help businesses articulate smart targets for biodiversity? So there are tools in our conservation science toolbox to help work through that. Beyond that, how can we help businesses really assess where they operate in the natural environment and how they interact with the natural environment and the key sort of processes and influences that they have on biodiversity? This can really help. There are conceptual models and all sorts of quantitative models that can help businesses really, untangle this mess and complication of nature and biodiversity to really assess key points where they're contributing to biodiversity loss, to try and maybe target actions to reduce their biodiversity impacts. Beyond that, we've got the development of biodiversity metrics. This is a big one at the moment. There's a lot of businesses talking about biodiversity metrics. There are a lot of tools out there that can actually help work through the development of metrics. I'm not talking about off-the-shelf measurement or monitoring tools that are available online. I'm talking about just processes like structured decision making to help businesses work through in a logical way. What are our objectives? What sort of audience do we want to report biodiversity metrics to? And, therefore, what should those metrics be? And then the final one that I think conservation science can really help businesses with is tools that can help them think about the actions that they can implement that will have positive outcomes for nature. So that's all about estimating the effectiveness of management actions and evaluating those, having monitoring systems in place to adaptively manage systems and improve the way that the activities that we undertake can truly have impacts for biodiversity, positive impacts. So some of the examples of the projects I'm working on are, of course, this project with Tom and Matt. And basically, this is a foundation of work that I see to get businesses involved in a dialogue about what they can do for biodiversity and how they can start to set corporate biodiversity objectives and actions. I'm also working, for example, with BP. They're really interested in the mitigation hierarchy and the concept of no net loss of biodiversity. So I've done some work with them around the science behind this concept of no net loss of biodiversity. And that is getting fed into BP's operations through the development of a new biodiversity management policy. I'm also working with the IUCN, and that's a project that we've started this year, which is all about developing a decision support framework to guide corporate biodiversity accountability. And by that I mean this touches on the work around biodiversity metrics. Often I attend workshops and meetings where I hear businesses say, we need a metric. Tell us what metric we should use. And we don't think that that's the right question to ask, first of all. We need to understand, what are your objectives? What audience do you want to report this type of metric to? Do you want to know information about biodiversity at a site level all the way up to a corporate level? So there's actually a spectrum of corporate biodiversity accountability applications that we need to really map out to demonstrate. There are many different types of metrics you may want to develop, but we need to be very clear about what the purpose of your corporate biodiversity reporting would be first. So basically the ultimate aims of my fellowship are to raise awareness about these scientific approaches that could really help businesses understand and manage their biodiversity impacts. And I'm really interested in collating ideas for a suite of business applications to really test the application of conservation science techniques to help businesses measure, evaluate and report on biodiversity. So just to finish, I just wanted to show, these are some of the key businesses, NGOs, conservation agencies and academic institutions that I'm working with. It's a really exciting space. There's so much work to be done in this area. So I'm very excited to be working with the JNCC, and I hope we can continue this work. So I think it's a really important area, and far more conservation scientists really need to get involved, because businesses are taking notice of biodiversity right now. They will proceed with or without us. So I think it's an enormous opportunity for conservation scientists to really get on board and try and help inform the way that businesses can truly take positive action for biodiversity. So that's me.
Thank you very much, Prue. Now we're going to open for questions, but I think we'll check to see whether we have questions online first before turning to the room.
Yes, we have one question. I think, Matt, this is for you, from Jenny Merriman from BirdLife. Will there be a business track at the ESP conference in Spain later this year?
To answer directly, Jenny, we're working with the Secretariat currently. I have a it's been put to the executive committee in China, which was held in China in December. We were looking at the business track. We're working up a kind of a draft spec. I've spoken with Martine at the ESP Secretariat. I'm obviously having to speak to my directors and to really kind of bottom out what it is. So the simple answer is we're working on it, and hopefully yes, but it's definitely being worked on.
Thank you. The next one I think is for Tom. On your last slide, I think, where you mentioned the case studies that are needed.
Oh yeah.
Peter Easton from Water Sustain has asked, what is the name of the case studies project? And are you only interested in UK examples or also other countries?
Yeah, well, it's we call it sort of mainstreaming biodiversity targets for business. That's the title of the project, really. We're looking for case studies from all over, really. We're keen to see from many parts of the globe and multiple sectors. So, yeah. But if we got Peter's details, we can email him.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Anyone interested in supplying business case studies that has not heard about the project to date, you can look up my Twitter account, which is Prue Addison, @PrueAddison, and I tweeted about it yesterday, and there's full links to how you can provide business case studies there.
There are also links on the JNCC webpage as they've been put up as well. So.
Just on that point as well, with the case studies, what we're really ideally looking for is examples of where business are taking tangible action on biodiversity. So maybe kind of stepping away from the eco-efficiency, I'm not taking anything away from the eco-efficiency measures that the private sector are taking, but it's really trying to understand what those direct actions for biodiversity per se are. So that's what we're really looking for at the moment.
Thank you both. This could be either Tom or Prue, it could be directed to. Did you participate in the Edinburgh World Forum on Natural Capital in November 2017?
No, but Matt.
JNCC went, so yeah, we participated. We didn't present, but we're very much hooked into say Johnny's team at Scottish Wildlife Trust, also Natural Capital Coalition. So yeah, we are very much plugged into what comes out of the World Forum indeed. And myself, Deanna was there, also my direct manager, Diana Mortimer was there as well. So there was a representation from the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services team.
But if anyone from the World Natural Capital Forum would like to invite us to present the next one, we'd be happy to.
Right.
Equally, the Convention for Biological Diversity, Business and Biodiversity Forum, we are hoping to present some of the work there and some of my knowledge exchange work at the end of the year. So it's still a mystery as to who is organising that, but we're talking to a lot of people about the potential for doing that.
Thank you. Peter again has asked the name of the IUCN collaboration project. I think that was Prue's presentation.
We have named it Corporate Biodiversity Accountability, and there is a brief project outline on my website, prueaddison.com, and I'd be happy to share more information if you have the email address.
Yeah, you can share that. And then Paul Arnold has asked, he lost sound at one point and he missed a bit from Prue's presentation.
Oh no.
So when you were commenting on what the right question is to ask as opposed to what tools should be used.
Yeah, so the approach that I take is always starting with the decision context. So understanding why a business needs to know about biodiversity, what action they intend to take, who would they communicate this information to before they go to set their biodiversity objectives and then their metrics. It's all about setting a decision context first.
Okay, brilliant. And last one from Carolyn from, not sure where. Are you in contact with the NCC for they are preparing a biodiversity protocol to the Natural Capital Protocol?
Yep, we're fully aware of that work and we're plugged in, thanks.
Fantastic participation from online.
Question for Prue, or maybe a pointer for Prue, in terms of what you were saying there about being clear about what is it that you are trying to measure. There's some very good material that's being produced by the Global Biodiversity Indicators Partnership, WCMC. So can I recommend that you link with that?
We're linked in.
Good.
Should we repeat the question?
Yeah.
So the question was just around biodiversity metrics, and was I aware of the Global Biodiversity Indicators Partnership and the work that they're doing on metric development? Yes, I am, and I completely agree with their principles, and that is all about setting a decision context and objectives before you go ahead and set metrics.
Part of the reason for mentioning that being that they've got documented guidance on how to do that,
Yes.
which some others may not have seen and might be useful to link to.
Yes, so they do have guidance on their website about that.
It's a question for you, Matt. What are the future opportunities that you see with regard to business and biodiversity for organizations like JNCC and other organizations going forward?
Well, I think some of the work we're doing with the global program, so Vin is fully aware, is understanding how we can take business needs and business perceptions for mainstreaming biodiversity, for example, and we can then feed that into the shaping of the targets. I think that's a real great opportunity to make the targets much more exactly what Tom's project's trying to do, to make them more real and more attainable and more translated for business. I think that's a great opportunity for us. I think working, as we've already seen, with academia, with business, and really being able to kind of push the knowledge that we have as scientists, we are a scientific agency, being able to link into, so how do the activities that business per se are taking, how does that fit into both international, national, and also devolved policy framework? So, for example, Scottish Land Use Strategy, looking at the future, the Environment Bill for Wales. So understanding, what are the kind of the policy areas which this is helping to address, the restoration targets, and there's kind of clear links that we can actually we can help businesses link up to, but also really how do we then get that information back from business so we can show that there's also private investment going into this, as well as public purse investment going into the conservation of ecosystems and biodiversity. I think that's a really good good opportunity. And also, you know, we are an impartial advisor. So, you know, we sit in a very kind of an interesting space in the sense that, okay, we have to, you know, we have our objectives and we have our frameworks and our strategy which we have to work in, which is obviously agreed by, you know, our funders and by central administration, devolved administrations. But, you know, we can provide that impartial advice and also act as that glue. You know, JNCC can act as that glue for all of the different parties, academia, for business, for policymakers to come together and take that integrated approach that brings in society, economy, and science to actually, you know, drive this agenda forward and really, you know, truly create a sustainable future.
Stephen.
Yeah, thanks for the presentations. It's a question about the scalability of all the techniques that you've been describing, and you know, and engaging business at all scales. And I think a lot of the examples that we've heard today are big business, BP, Shell have been mentioned, etc. And you know, obviously this is, you know, an approach, a way forward that needs to involve small and medium-sized enterprises as well. And you know, wanting to make sure that they can engage without having a negative impact on their business. And I think often it's the big businesses that can sort of consume these approaches. And I guess it's good because they're leaders and can do that. But I'm just wondering about your views on how this can work and what needs to be more done to actually allow this to sort of roll out across businesses at different scales.
I think that it's very important, and I got asked this question at the start of my fellowship: why multinational corporations? Why not SMEs? And I'm like, well, you know, where do we start? There's just so many ways, and there are a lot of people that are working at that local level with SMEs. I'm taking this higher level approach, but I think it can be driven by both ends working, because I mean, it's a lot of the SMEs that, you know, are down the end of the supply chains of the big corporations as well. So I think both need to be aware of, you know, of biodiversity and take action on biodiversity. It may be very different things that they do, but it's all important. And there's just, as I said, there's just so much work to be done in this area. So it's more, we've just got to take off, you know, bite-sized chunks.
Also, I should add that with one of the conventions we're looking at is CITES. A lot of the businesses involved in CITES are not massive businesses; they're much smaller traders and things like that. So we're hoping that we're going to get some kind of a picture of what small businesses are doing and how they might be able to do more from that.
And I mean, Vin's already linked into that. And just to come back, I think some of the work that we're doing around risks. So, for example, if you look at an integrated approach, you can start looking. So, what I was talking about, small island states. What you can do is, if you take that ecosystem approach and you look at where those sweet spots are for improved environmental management that can deliver nature-based solutions, can, you know, reduce those risks, then what you're doing is you're reducing risk for a whole suite of sectors. So, in terms of investment, where that investment comes from, that investment can come from small to medium enterprises. It can come from large enterprises. I think the idea is to start to try to delineate where is that action on biodiversity and natural capital. What are the returns on that investment? What are the opportunities? And bringing in that cross-sectoral collaboration. And I think, you know, when you start particularly say things to, like, you know, sustainable agriculture, when you look at that, you've got everything from the exporters, you've got the agricultural companies, you've got the space companies, you know, and we're bringing in the small to medium enterprises through the local, so we're calling the informal grower base, would actually contribute to anything between 20 and 50% of the global supply chain. But in order to do that, you have to start, it's like Prue's saying, you have to understand what's the objective, where are we starting, what is the boundary, and then you start, you know, testing these approaches out. Because we are at early doors at this, but, you know, there is that. And I think what we have to do is obviously take what the large organizations are doing and what they're testing, and really think about how we can package that up. And also having the SMEs, particularly through the supply chains, you know, of these larger companies, brought into the mix as well. So they wouldn't necessarily be operating on their own. They operate within the kind of the wider, you know, global matrix of supply chains, basically.
If I can make a comment on this too, it'd be very interesting to look and see how these concepts introduced in the larger corporations are feeding through the supply chains,
Yeah.
and what are the problems
Yeah.
that they might run into as it goes down through the supply chain?
Yeah.
Because that could be a very nice focus for some work.
I think there's lots of other things. You've got like local nature partnerships, local enterprise partnerships, which, we could explore those kind of areas, at a national and regional scale. I know they're obviously English focused, but, we have the area statements in Wales, so you've got these different areas which, businesses are in the mix, and it's just getting in there and helping to help just disaggregate what those challenges are. I think the other thing is I believe that the Global Nature Fund, Marianne Hamill, spoke to me a couple of years ago about stuff in Germany where they've been looking at thinking how they bring the SMEs on. So it's a great question. It's hugely challenging, but it's not something that's that's going unnoticed.
Yeah, can I bring in one more question online?
Yep, this is from Peter again, Peter Easton. He missed the first 10 minutes of the talk, so apologies if you already said so. He would like you to please clarify how biodiversity fits with natural capital. Is it different or a part of it?
There's a great infographic in the Natural Capital Coalition. When we talk about natural capital, it is just a way of thinking about the natural environment. And fundamentally, biodiversity is everything from the genetic codes that's driving the evolution of the natural world, that underpins the functions and the processes that are delivering the goods, the services, and fundamentally the benefits which we value either economically or otherwise. So biodiversity fundamentally underpins natural capital and natural capital assets. And I think this is the kind of the point that we're trying to raise with the work that JNCC and others are doing, is that biodiversity is often seen as something that's separate to natural capital. Fundamentally, biodiversity is what runs, it's what drives the global processes. It drives the natural environment, and without biodiversity, you don't have natural capital. Basically, that's my.
I agree.
Yeah, that's good. Any other questions in our room here at JNCC? Oh, come on. Wake up. Vicky.
Well, I did miss some of it, so again, apologies if you covered it. Quite a lot of focus on the impact that companies have on biodiversity. Is there a part of the work that's also about helping companies to understand how they rely on biodiversity, how they need it, how it's part of their prosperity in their business?
Yeah.
Well, you can.
We've got the Arcadis project, Vicky. Yes, I know you came to them later. So, which is looking at how biodiversity loss actually presents a material risk to the value creation of different sectors. What was novel about that as well is and it made it difficult for Arcadis, was we wanted to try and get away from the primary industry. So, we understand forestry and agriculture, they rely directly on the natural environment. But really trying to pick apart what does it mean across the supply chains to, the secondary, the tertiary business, and even, what does it mean to, say, Microsoft if they lose biodiversity? What does that really mean to that large Google, Facebook? And they're, these massive players. And that's what we were trying to start to pick apart, which is, it's the next part of the challenge. They invest in it, but there's not necessarily those dependencies. So yes, and I think that is where particularly the work that the Natural Capital Coalition, Natural Capital Finance, and CII, the work they're doing, and CISL as well, that is really starting to demonstrate, look, this is not just about minimising impact, it's about, this is really important for the long-term value creation and the long-term survival of not just your business, but the future global economy, and actually how we shape that future global economy going forward to 2020, 2050.
And actually also, when the original biodiversity age targets were being formed, there was a lot of debate that went on, for instance, World Economic Forum and various other large-scale, mostly big business kind of areas where they were actually talking a lot about the risks and dependencies, and there was a big focus on the materiality of biodiversity from that point of view. So it's kind of almost going back to that, but in more detail and more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I think that was a very interesting seminar. I certainly enjoyed it a lot. I hope everyone online and our room full here also enjoyed it. I would like to ask you to give the presenters a big hand. It was really a great success, I think.